Sometimes the trap you set is the one you fall into. The scheme you build is the one that buries you. And the precaution you skip is the one that would have saved your life. This video documents 6 cases where people died as a direct result of their own decisions. Not accidents, not bad luck, but choices that created the exact conditions that killed them. Any resemblance in fictional portions is coincidental. Do not attempt to recreate anything shown here. 1. Lake Harrington sits in a hollow of the Cascade foothills about 40 miles east of Medford, Oregon. On the night of September 14, 2007, the water near the marina docks was black and flat. Out in the open channel, a stiff north wind had been building since midnight. Short, choppy waves slapped the pilings in sharp, irregular bursts. Every few seconds, a gust crossed the boards and the mooring ropes creaked against their cleats. The smell off the water was cold and faintly mineral, the smell of a deep lake in late autumn. Most people who spend real time on the water know what that wind means. They go home and wait it out. The man walking down the marina ramp at 2 in the morning did not own a boat. He owned a 12-foot polyethylene skiff barely worth $400. He owned a set of bolt cutters and a pickup truck parked half a mile up a gravel service road with mud smeared over its plates. That night he had a plan he considered efficient. 3 marinas sat along that stretch of lake. The first 2 had security cameras mounted on their dock sheds. The third had none. It did have 5 outboard motors padlocked to the dock cleats. Big Mercury and Yamaha 4-strokes. Each worth between $1,500 and $3,000 on the resale market. He had watched the third marina for 2 weeks from a pull-off on the county road, checking the patterns, noting when the lights went dark. He worked the bolt cutters cleanly through the padlocks. He wrestled each motor over the gunnel and set it down in the stern of his little skiff. The boat was rated for a maximum payload of roughly 450 pounds. The first motor went in without drama. The second shifted the trim noticeably. He felt the stern settle a few inches lower in the water and grabbed the dock cleat to steady himself. The third motor made him pause. The stern was riding visibly low. The waterline was creeping up the transom. He looked at the 2 motors remaining on the dock. He looked at the dark water. He kept going. The fourth was a 60-pound 4-stroke Yamaha with a full fuel tank, the heaviest of the 5. It landed in the stern with a hollow thud that made the thin polyethylene hull flex under his boots. Then the 5th, 5 outboard motors, combined weight close to 270 pounds, piled into the rear third of a boat rated for a fraction of that. A grown man and his tools were already aboard. The bow rode up at an absurd angle. The stern sat barely above the waterline. He decided to secure the load before moving. The last thing he wanted was a motor sliding overboard in the dark. He ran a single heavy galvanized chain through the tow handles of all 5 motors and padlocked the ends together into one solid mass. The chain was the kind used for vehicle towing, thick as a man's thumb. He checked the padlock twice. Nothing would roll now. He started the small electric trolling motor clipped to the stern bracket and nosed away from the dock into open water. The channel wind hit the moment he cleared the dock's shadow. Out in the open, the waves had a different character. Short, steep chops spaced just far enough apart to catch a slow-moving boat at the wrong angle. 18 inches of wave height sounds like nothing. For most boats, it is nothing. But when a hull's center of gravity has been pushed too far toward the stern, a moderate wave finds the tipping point in fractions of a second. The stern tries to go under. The bow tries to rise. Past a certain threshold, the hull cannot recover. With that load, the threshold was wherever the first real wave wanted it to be. A swell caught the port stern quarter. The hull rolled hard to starboard. 270 pounds of chained steel finished the job in under 2 seconds. He went into the water. The motors did not. They went straight down together, all 5, still locked in a single mass by his own chain. They sank through 40 feet of cold black water toward the lake bed. The chain was 12 feet long. In the chaos of the capsize, cold shock, darkness, disorientation, his right boot slipped through the loop between 2 motor housings. He may not have felt it happen. 270 pounds of steel does not allow for debate. It pulled him down before he had time to reach the surface. Divers found his body the following morning. He was lying on the silt 40 feet down. His boot was still through the loop. The chain was still padlocked. The key to that padlock was recovered from his jacket pocket at autopsy, the same jacket he had been wearing when he clipped it shut 40 minutes earlier, standing on the dock. Satisfied with his work, the 5 motors were hauled up by a salvage crew that afternoon and returned to the marina office by 2 in the afternoon, undamaged, still linked together, still ready to run. 2. For most of 2006, Dean Waller passed as another quiet man on the eastern edge of Klamath County, Oregon. He worked odd construction jobs. He paid his rent in cash. He drove a beige 1996 Chevy pickup that no one ever remembered seeing twice. What his neighbors did not know was different. He had been running an illegal marijuana grow on state-managed forest land since early that spring in a stand of pine and alder east of town. The operation was modest by any professional measure. Around 200 plants across 4 clearings cut into public land. A gravity-fed drip line from a creek 60 yards uphill kept them watered. He tended the plants on visits he kept deliberately irregular. He never came on the same day 2 weeks in a row. He rotated between 3 different pull-offs along the county road. He left no equipment on site between visits, nothing that would catch a hiker's eye. It worked quietly through the entire first season and most of the second. Then, in late summer of 2008, he arrived one Tuesday morning to find that someone had moved through his largest clearing overnight. They had cut the most mature plants right down to the stalk. The cuts were clean, not rough pulls. Someone with pruning shears had worked fast and selectively, taking only the plants furthest along and leaving the rest. He lost close to 40% of that season's yield in a single night. He told himself it was opportunistic, a random encounter, a hiker who had stumbled onto the grow. He was wrong. They came back the following spring, in 2009, and hit 2 of the 4 clearings on the same night. Same method, same selectivity. The person or persons involved had clearly been watching him work. They knew his schedule, they knew his layout, they knew which clearings were furthest along. He stood in the stripped rows on that May morning with mud on his boots, and understood that the next visit was not a question of whether, only when. Something settled in him during the drive back to the county road. It was not exactly anger. It was more like a problem being framed and a solution beginning to form. He spent 2 weeks turning it over. He spent 2 more days building. The devices were not improvised. He drove 40 miles out of the county to a weekend gun show and paid cash for 4 single-shot 12-gauge shotguns. He spread the purchases across 2 separate visits a week apart. He built mounting frames from welded steel angle iron and rigged each shotgun to fire when a trip line across the path was disturbed. The mechanism was simple and effective. He used the nearly invisible monofilament leader line that trout fishermen use in clear water, a material almost impossible to see against the ground. He loaded each with buckshot and cocked them into position over 3 careful evenings. He mapped each location in his memory the way a person maps furniture in a dark room, precise enough to move through at speed without thinking. He used the creekside path exclusively after that. It was the only approach he had deliberately left clear. He worked the property for 6 more days without incident. On the evening of August 14, 2009, he came in from the county roadside. Investigators never established for certain why he changed routes that particular evening. The creek had been running fast and high after 3 days of steady rain. A neighbor later told deputies he had seen him standing at the creek crossing that afternoon, looking at the water. Whatever the reason, he walked the county road approach at a normal pace, not cautiously, not slowly. The way a man walks a path he believes he knows perfectly. The third trap sat 90 feet in from the trailhead, at a slight left bend where the trees grew close on both sides. There was no easy way around it. The monofilament had been sitting under tension for 6 days through the heat of an Oregon August and the added moisture of that week's rain. What most people do not know about monofilament is that it absorbs water. When the line swells, it stiffens slightly. The tension on the release pin increases. It takes less force to trigger. He did not need to kick it hard. Contact was enough. The weapon discharged at a distance of roughly 14 inches. He sustained fatal injuries on the approach trail and did not reach the clearing. His truck remained at the roadside pull-off through the night. A neighbor noticed it still there the following morning and, after several hours, called the sheriff's non-emergency line. Deputies arrived around 10. They found him on the trail. The search of the property located all 4 trap mechanisms. Each was in position. Each was functional. Each was correctly aimed at trail height. Investigators' notes describe the construction as deliberate, competent, and clearly the work of someone who understood the mechanism well. 3 of the 4 devices were still cocked and loaded when the bomb disposal team removed them. The 4th had performed exactly as its builder designed it to. 3. The partition was bolted to the floor of Kyle Mercer's cargo van on a Tuesday, and by Friday he had decided it was in the way. It was a standard cargo divider, a welded steel mesh frame about 3 feet tall, bolted to the floor between the driver's seat and the cargo bay. Its job was simple. In a hard stop, cargo tries to keep moving forward at whatever speed the van was doing. The partition stops it before it reaches the cab. The thing had come with the van when Mercer bought the vehicle used 3 years earlier. It had done its job without complaint through every load he had hauled since. The contract that changed everything came through a building supply broker in early October 2005. 50 lengths of 12-foot steel electrical conduit. Straight galvanized tubes, about 1.25 inches in diameter, to be hauled from a warehouse on the south side of Tucson to a construction depot 40 miles north on Interstate 10. The job paid well for a same-day run, and Mercer took it without much thought. The problem was geometry. The tubes were 12 feet long. The van's usable cargo floor, measured from the back doors to the partition, ran 9 feet 3 inches, 3 feet short. Mercer's solution was direct. He unbolted the partition entirely, folded the passenger seat forward, and ran the tubes through the gap between the front seats and into the cab. It worked spatially. The tubes fit. The back doors closed. The cab was navigable if you stayed in the driver's seat. He made the run successfully that day and again the next. 2 clean deliveries, no incidents. By the 3rd run, on the morning of October 12th, the arrangement had become ordinary. He loaded 50 tubes, closed the doors, and pulled out of the warehouse heading north. The morning was clear and dry. Light traffic, visibility unlimited. He was in a bad mood. Witnesses in 2 other vehicles were already paying attention to him by mile marker 37. He had changed lanes without signaling 4 times in 5 miles, each time pulling close to the car ahead before swinging around it. One driver told investigators she had been watching the van in her mirror for the last 2 exits because something about it made her uneasy. She couldn't say what. At mile marker 41, Mercer came up fast behind a white pickup in the left lane doing the speed limit. He rode its bumper for roughly half a mile. Then he flashed his high beams. Then he held his horn down for around 5 full seconds. The pickup moved right. Mercer pulled ahead by 6 to 8 car lengths. Then he cut back across 2 lanes in front of the same pickup and stood on his brakes. Hard. The trooper who later measured the skid marks put the deceleration at roughly 9/10 of a G. At that rate, a van going 80 miles per hour comes to a near complete stop in roughly 240 feet. For the van and everything bolted to it. The frame, the axles, the wheels, the driver's seat. That stop happened in 240 feet. For the 50 steel conduit tubes in the cargo bay, no force acted on them at all. This is what engineers call inertia. An object in motion stays in motion until something stops it. At 80 miles per hour, 500 pounds of steel was moving at exactly the same velocity as the vehicle carrying it. When the van stopped, the tubes did not. There was nothing between them and the front of the cab. No partition, no mesh, no steel frame. Mercer had unbolted it and left it leaning against the warehouse wall 3 days earlier. The leading ends of multiple tubes struck the back of the driver's seat at near original speed. A cargo van seat is designed to support a seated person during normal driving. It is not a ballistic barrier. The seat frame buckled on contact and the tubes continued forward through it. Mercer sustained fatal penetrating trauma and was pronounced dead at the scene. The van came to rest on the right shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. They had activated automatically on the hard braking. The white pickup he had cut off stopped 50 yards back. Its driver got out, looked at what was in front of him, and sat down on the asphalt. He stayed there until a trooper walked him to the guardrail. He told investigators afterward that he had felt genuinely angry during the whole sequence. The tailgating, the horn blast, being cut off. He had wanted to lean on his own horn, to say something out the window. And then, in about 2 seconds, the anger just stopped. 4. The light under the door of Unit 14 was what the overnight security guard noticed first. A thin yellow strip along the bottom of the roll-up door, showing at 2:30 in the morning when the rest of the warehouse complex was dark. He tried the handle. The door wasn't locked. He lifted it a foot, got a face full of something chemical and sweet, and immediately dropped it back down. He made the call from outside and waited. That was November 22nd, 2012. Paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. They found a man on the floor near an overturned drum. Work light still on. 9 drums of solvent open or partially open around him. The hazmat team that followed measured the air in the unit at over 800 parts per million of toluene. The threshold at which toluene begins affecting the central nervous system is around 200 parts per million. At 500 parts per million, the effects are rapid and severe. The man on the floor had been in there alone for several hours at a concentration 4 times that level. The cause of death was determined as cardiac arrest secondary to acute solvent intoxication. Investigators who looked into his background assembled a picture quickly. He had been operating a small illegal recycling business for close to 3 years. The front end was legitimate looking. He registered as a sole proprietor and put a business name on the side of his van. He offered waste pickup to factories that used industrial solvents, toluene, methyl ethyl ketone, and similar chemicals in their production processes. Factories generate significant quantities of contaminated waste solvent, drums of the stuff that can't go down a drain and are expensive to dispose of properly through licensed channels. What he charged was almost nothing. He came when called, took the drums, signed a receipt, and left. Factories liked him. The documentation he left behind looked clean. What the documentation did not reflect was what he did with the drums afterward. He would bring them to Unit 14, where he had a setup. Improvised filtration rigs, a pump, rows of unlabeled 5-liter containers. He processed the spent solvent, decanted it, filtered it, repackaged it, and sold it back into the gray market. Small body shops that wanted cheap solvent and asked no questions bought it. At his peak, he was processing 6 to 10 drums a week. Not wealth by any measure, but steady cash that left almost no paper trail. He had been careful about most things for nearly 3 years. He worked at night because the smell of toluene coming from a storage unit would raise questions he couldn't answer. He sealed the bottom of the roll-up door himself with rubber weather stripping to stop the odor bleeding out. He was methodical. What he had been less careful about, over time, was ventilation. The unit had a small manual vent near the roof that he sometimes opened and sometimes didn't, depending on the temperature outside. Cold nights, he kept it closed to stay warm. That was the habit that killed him. Toluene evaporates continuously at room temperature. The vapor is heavier than air, which means it doesn't rise and disperse. It settles and pools at floor level. In a sealed metal box with no airflow and 9 open or partially open drums, the concentration begins building from the moment you close the door. It builds fastest and highest at the bottom, right at ground level, right where a person crouching or kneeling to work on a drum would be. The human nose adapts to consistent odors within a few minutes. The technical term is olfactory fatigue. The brain classifies the smell as background and stops flagging it, even as the actual concentration in the air continues rising. The smell seems to disappear. It does not disappear. He had worked in this unit for nearly 3 years and had never had a serious problem. Partly luck, partly because on most nights he had kept at least one corner of the door cracked open a few inches. On the night of November 22nd, he had 9 drums to process and it was cold outside. He closed everything up and started work. The body shops and refinishing businesses he had been supplying were traced through phone records and delivery notes recovered from the unit. Most of them said they had not known where the solvent came from. The pricing alone should have prompted a question. 3 years of receipts, contacts, and transaction records were recovered from Unit 14. All of it documented carefully. All of it in the unit when the door opened. The guard's report noted that when he lifted the roll-up door that night, the smell hit him immediately and he recognized it as chemical. He said it smelled almost sweet. That is the correct description of toluene at low concentrations. At the concentration inside that unit, the smell was the same. Only the quantity was different. 5. On the night of October 3rd, 2014, a chainsaw was running in the Blackwater State Forest in the Florida Panhandle. No permit had been issued for timber work in that section. No crew had signed in at the ranger station. It was 1:15 midnight. The man running the saw was working alone. His truck was parked on a fire access road about 300 yards from the work site. He was taking oak timber, big, old-growth live oak, the kind that takes a century to reach cutting size and sells for good money to the right buyer, with no questions asked. He had done this before. Not here, maybe, but the work itself was familiar. He owned a good saw, and he had dropped trees without incident a handful of times on private land. He knew how to fall a tree, or believed he did. There is a difference between knowing how to fall a tree and understanding what can go wrong when it does not fall the way you intended. Legitimate logging crews work in pairs for this reason. The second man watches the trunk above the cut zone for early signs of split or unexpected lean. One man with a chainsaw is focused on the cut. He cannot watch everything at once. A man working alone in the dark is operating in conditions that professional timber fallers specifically train to avoid. The phenomenon that killed him that night has a name in the logging industry. It is called a barber chair. The term describes what the stump looks like when it happens. The trunk splits vertically before the tree is fully cut through. The lower half of the split kicks backward as the top falls forward, like the footrest of a reclining chair snapping up. It happens when the back cut, the final chainsaw cut that severs the hinge and releases the tree, is made incorrectly. Specifically, when the felling notch is cut too deep, leaving the hinge wood too thin. That mistake removes the tree's ability to guide its own fall cleanly. On a large, heavy tree, the falling top generates enormous downward force on one side of the remaining stump. If the hinge is not strong enough to guide that force, the trunk does not fold. It splits. The split travels upward through the wood grain at speed. As the top tips forward, the butt end of the lower section rotates backward under massive force. Professional fallers know the warning signs. A crack different from normal wood fiber tearing. A trunk that begins tipping too fast. The visual of a split running up the grain. They know to move. The standard escape route is angled 45 degrees to the side and back, clear of the fall line and well outside the zone where the butt can rotate. The road is planned and cleared before the first cut is made. Moving fast through brush in the dark, with a running chainsaw still in hand, without a pre-cleared route, that is not escape. It is reacting. And reacting to a barber chair happens in a window of about 1 second. The man working alone in Blackwater Forest that night was using his saw on a live oak that measured roughly 38 inches in diameter at the base. A tree that size can weigh upward of 4 tons in the crown alone. He cut the face notch first, as any trained faller would. The cut was too deep. It removed more than 1/3 of the trunk's diameter rather than the standard quarter, leaving a hinge far thinner than the tree required. When he ran the back cut and the hinge released, the split happened fast. The crack would have been audible, a sharp, tearing report distinct from chainsaw noise. distinct from the normal sounds of a tree beginning to fall. Whether he recognized it for what it was, or whether he moved, or whether he simply did not have time, the investigation could not determine. The lower butt section rotated backward across his position. He sustained non-survivable blunt force trauma at the scene. A ranger on a night patrol found his truck on the fire access road around 4 in the morning, engine cold. He followed the boot prints into the forest and located the work site with his flashlight. The tree had fallen forward, exactly where the man had intended it to go. The chainsaw was lying in the brush nearby, engine off, out of fuel. The face notch cut was visible in the stump, too deep, as the forensic logger who later examined the scene confirmed. The hinge wood measured roughly 2.5 inches at its thinnest point. For a 38-inch diameter oak, the minimum recommended hinge width is 5 to 6 inches. The tree had never been controllable from the moment the back cut began. Behind the stump, the ground was torn up from the force of the butt kick. The personal protective equipment in the truck, the chainsaw chaps, the helmet, the hearing protection, was all present and unused. He had brought the right gear. He had left it in the truck. 6. The boiler room at the Karvonian district heating plant in Tampere, Finland had been running continuously for 9 years without a serious incident. That was the standard it had been built to meet. The plant supplied hot water to a residential district of roughly 4,000 apartments. It did so through a pressurized pipe network that ran around the clock, 365 days a year. The maintenance staff knew the system the way mechanics know an engine they've worked on for years. By its sounds, its rhythms, the way pressure shifted at certain points during cold weather. In late September of 2012, a valve on the primary distribution manifold began seating incorrectly. It would not close fully. The valve was a gate type, about 14 inches in diameter, controlling flow through a section of high-pressure steam pipe. A gate valve works by lowering a flat metal disc, the gate, perpendicular to the flow, sealing the pipe completely when closed. When the gate no longer seats cleanly, the valve cannot be fully isolated. The system protocol for a stuck valve was clearly written. Stop flow to that section. Relieve pressure from the upstream side. Then attempt to free the gate using the specified procedure. The sequence existed for a reason. The pipe ran at a working pressure of around 12 bar, roughly 175 pounds per square inch. The steam inside ran at approximately 300 degrees Celsius. To put those numbers in terms that matter, water at sea level boils at 100 degrees. Steam at 300 degrees is 3 times hotter than boiling water, under a pressure that would crush a car tire flat if applied directly. At that pressure and temperature, the energy stored in a single meter of pipe is not abstract. It is the kind of energy that engineers describe using the word explosive, not as a metaphor, but as a classification. The maintenance worker assigned to the valve on the morning of September 19th had been with the plant for 11 years. His name was Eino. He knew the protocol. He had been dealing with the same partially seized valve for 3 days. He had filled out the same work order twice and left it in the supervisor's tray each time. Both times he was told the section shutdown would need to wait for a scheduling window that kept not materializing. The window had been promised for Tuesday, then Thursday. Now it was Friday morning. On that particular morning, something shifted. Maybe it was the 3rd failed attempt to turn the valve handle. Maybe it was the scheduling conversation that happened at the start of the shift. Whatever the specific trigger was, Eino walked to the equipment cage. He came back with a 12-kilogram sledgehammer, about 26 pounds. He positioned himself in front of the valve body. His intention was to free the stuck gate by striking the cast iron housing directly. This is not an uncommon impulse. In almost any other context, hitting a seized mechanism to free it is a reasonable approach. Cast iron, however, is not a material that responds to impact the way mild steel or wrought iron does. Cast iron is hard and brittle. It does not absorb impact energy by deforming. It absorbs it by fracturing. A casting hit with a heavy hammer does not bend or dent. It shatters. Under normal atmospheric pressure, this would mean a cracked housing. A problem, but a containable one. Under 12 bar of superheated steam pressure, a fracture point in the housing is not the end of the problem. It is the release mechanism. The valve body failed on the first blow. Cast iron shatters in fragments, not in pieces. The energy stored in the pressurized line behind the brake found its exit point in the same instant the housing came apart. Superheated steam at 300 degrees Celsius and 12 bar does not emerge in a visible cloud. At the point of release, it is invisible. It expands to roughly 1,600 times its liquid volume in the first fraction of a second. In an enclosed boiler room, there is nowhere for that expansion to go. The thermal and pressure wave covered the area around the valve in a fraction of a second. Ino sustained severe thermal injuries and fatal trauma and did not survive. The plant's emergency shutdown system activated automatically on the pressure drop. It isolated the section within seconds. That was the same isolation the protocol would have achieved manually before any work began. A safety investigator who reviewed the incident noted in his report that the valve housing, at the time Ino struck it, showed no external cracking or visible defect. There was no sign from the outside that it was near failure. The only sign was the pressure gauge on the adjacent panel, which had been reading normal all morning. It was still reading normal when the room was cleared. 6 stories. None of them ended by accident. Each death was the direct result of a specific action, not a mistake born of thoughtlessness, but a conscious choice to ignore what mattered. The question is, when you see someone skipping an obvious safety step, like removing a partition, closing a door, or failing to put on a hard hat, do you intervene, or do you think that's their business? Answer honestly. Hit like if this hits home.